Hello, everyone. K-Dub here, and welcome to March's edition of Buddhism Monthly. So, how Buddhism Monthly works is we will go through a question for the month. We will look at a picture for the month, usually found on social media, or maybe there's a meme that was generated that we can find in the images tab of Google search, and then a verse of the month, in which we can use that for reflection. For a Buddhist practice for myself, or perhaps someone who's discovering their spirituality can reflect upon it in their search. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a question for the month, and the question of the month for March is, how does Buddhism or how do Buddhists view other world religions? And this has various answers depending on the practitioner, but generally speaking, Buddhists have open minds toward other world religions, and there is not really what I would call a solid sutta that says that other world religions are 100% wrong. There are definitely suttas that say that one should not say that the Buddhist path is the right way until they've become enlightened, which is the Canki Sutta. There'll be a link to that in the description. So until then, it's more of a journey from the preservation of truth to the final arrival of truth. And in the Sutta, it goes through sort of the steps, discovery of truth, and all that. And so anyone who might say, as a Buddhist practitioner, that the Buddhist path is the only path to purification, which it sort of says that in the Dhammapada. Sort of got to back it up. And it's not just through just saying something, it's through our actions as well. So there are some criteria to look at for that, especially their speech and their actions. Are they wholesome or are they unwholesome? If they are unwholesome, then their claim would be invalidated because one who achieves enlightenment, everything falls on that wholesome scale. Although for them, as an awakened being, it would be sort of neutral. It's sort of natural for them. So there's that. And uh, there are, however, those who identify as Buddhists and even Buddhist monks who have condoned violence against people of other religions. Primarily, the big focus has been practitioners of Islam, so Muslim groups. Because when we think of religious extremists, it seems like the predominant perception is those that practice Islam. And that's not, of course, 100% true. There are extremists in other world religions, including Buddhism. It's just that sometimes that gets swept under the rug in the West because we want that romantic version of Buddhism where that is not present. And it's a peaceful, compassionate religion, and that's it. But that's once again not 100% true. If you're gonna, if you're gonna, what's the word I'm looking for? Examine, that's it. If you're going to examine Buddhism, you got to examine all aspects of Buddhism, even the ones that maybe we don't particularly like. But generally speaking, open-minded toward other religions. There are some extremists who are very much intolerant. There are those who are tolerant, and then there are those that have what some people call religious respect, which means that they not only acknowledge differences, but they also have a deep found respect for the beliefs, use it as a reflection piece for why they believe what they believe, and they think that there's beauty to those beliefs that are different. So when I was in at Ithaca College, we had the Ithaca College Interfaith Council, one of the first college groups I went to on that campus, and it was a great experience to share our differences in a respectful environment where we weren't trying to prove each other right or wrong. We were just saying this is one of the critical aspects of the human condition, and this is how we address it as practicing Buddhists. This is how we address it as people who are perhaps Catholic, others who take a more Protestant viewpoint of the Bible and so forth. And then we also had the Jewish community on campus, and they had a representative there. We had a representative for pagan viewpoints. So it was definitely various. It was very enriching. And it's one of the things that if someone were to ask me what's one thing you miss about sort of that college environment, having that sort of forum is something that I miss. It's something that we don't talk about at my workplace for 100% valid reasons. But it's something that I would love for us to discuss if we can make it happen. And in the description, there will be articles of those examples of Buddhist extremism toward those of other religions. And, for me personally, it sounds more nationalism than Buddhism, but I'm gonna put the links in the description and then you can take a look for yourself. And you can share your thoughts in the comments if you are able to look through them. They're a little bit lengthy because they go through the history, especially the ones with Burma, which is called Myanmar now, and Sri Lanka. So those are the two primary examples that I was able to find. So that was the question of the month. So the short summary version of that is primarily Buddhists are open-minded toward other religions. However, there are extremists in Buddhist circles that are less tolerant and sometimes condone violence. And there are others on the opposite side where they are very religiously respectful. They appreciate the differences, they use it as a reflecting point, and they also see the beauty in it. And then are those that are in between that are tolerant, but they aren't quite at that, oh, well, that's a very beautiful teaching type thing. We're not quite there yet. So when we continue this edition, we're going to look at the picture of the month. So we'll see that very, very soon. So here we are with the picture of the month for March. And this picture, found it on Facebook. No one in my friend circle shared this, but I saved it on my phone because I knew that probably I would want to comment on this at some point. And so here's what the picture says. The picture says, "Life has taught me that we should never get too attached to anyone unless they also feel the same way towards you, because one-sided expectations can mentally destroy you." Now, I imagine that this is toward relationships in general, not necessarily romantic relationships, but friendships, romance, co-workers, so relationships in general. Now, the first part of this, life has taught me that we should never get too attached to anyone. That's something that, from a Buddhist perspective, is very wise because a person and also material objects are extremely transitory. They're changing, they're very dynamic, and the perception of stability is sort of something that's in our brains. But if we objectively look at it, things are always changing, and if we slow the mind down, we can perceive that. So this first part makes a lot of sense because when you look at the Four Noble Truths, it's the noble truth of dukkha, the noble truth, the origin of dukkha, and the origin of dukkha is desire. And the only way desire gets put to the side if there's no attachment to that desire. They're very interconnected. So if you have a desire, but there's no attachment to it, the desire sort of goes away. So if I'm thinking about pizza, oh, I have such a desire for pizza, and it just keeps, you know, repeating in my brain over and over again. Could really go for some pizza. Could really go for some pizza. That's attachment to that particular thought. It's not really an attachment to pizza either. It's sort of attachment to the idea of eating pizza. And I think it's very similar with relationships. It's not the attachment to the person in general. It's sort of the attachment to the idea of having a relationship with that person. And so the first part, I'm like, oh, well, that's really wise. And then we get into the unless part, and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. Unless they also feel the same towards you, because one-sided expectations can mentally destroy you. And that's perfectly 100% valid, and it's very true that if we have the expectation that those feelings are going to be reciprocated, but they aren't, that destroys us sort of on the inside because a need in that situation is not being fulfilled. And so what ends up happening is we go through various stages. We could be feeling stress, we could be feeling depression, we could be feeling anxiety. Is it something that I'm doing, or is it on them, or what? And so I understand where this is going, and I think that it's perfectly valid and true. But like at the ultimate level of Buddhism, that first part is the part that would be focused on. Life has taught me that we should never get too attached to anyone, not to the Buddha, not to our teachers, not to our spouse, not to our pets, not to our children, because all of those things are dynamic, transitory. I mean, eventually all of those beings are going to pass away and be out of our lives, or will pass away. And then, sometimes when people are under death, they're like, "Oh, what's so and so gonna do without me?" Or what's my pet gonna do without me? So it brings us even more dukkha at that point. But if there's no attachment to that, where say I was on my deathbed, but I had little or no attachment to a significant other, for example, those questions aren't really coming up. Those concerns are not coming up. That stress, that unsatisfactory feeling is not coming up. And so like at the highest intellectual and spiritual level, the life has taught me that we should never get too attached to anyone is spot on. The second part is definitely relevant toward lay people. So a lay person such as myself, we should also take the second part into consideration, unless they feel the same towards you, because we're not trying to reach the highest apple, the golden apple on top of the tree yet. We're trying to get those lower fruits to and gradually work our way up the step ladder to awakening. So that's important as well. And it's actually really great relationship advice too, is if the feelings just don't seem to be reciprocated, it is going to potentially destroy you on a mental level. And so one has to consider maybe this is not the relationship for me and it's becoming toxic and I need to separate myself from that, or else as another pic a lot of various pictures on Facebook that show up is you sort of lose yourself in that situation. And as much as there is no self in Buddhism, as a layperson, that ego's still going to be there. So we got to preserve that in order to get to awakening. And that's a very complicated, well, it's not complicated, really. It could be simplified very easily. But you need the ego to eliminate the attachment to the ego and desire to the ego. So yeah, if however, if there's no sense of self there before one, then there's no reason to go and achieve enlightenment, is the basic argument for using the ego to realize non-ego, essentially. So that is the picture of the month, and in a moment, we will look at the verse of the month. And finally, everyone, it is the verse of the month for us to reflect upon. And as a Buddhist practitioner, this is something that I should probably reflect upon every single day, every single moment, because this happens at work sometimes where there's this friction between what the teacher expectations and what kids are doing. And so I should always keep this in mind. So the verse that we're keeping in mind here is verse 5 of the Dhammapada, which is in chapter 1 called the Pairs. And this is Thanissaro Bhikkhu's translation. Hostilities aren't stilled through hostility, regardless. Hostilities are stilled through non-hostility. This an unending truth. An alternate translation might be hatred is never stilled through hatred, no matter what. Hatred is stilled only through goodwill. This is an eternal truth. Something of that nature. It's very similar when it comes to what it means. So let's keep the word hostilities. That has a lot of aversion, right? A lot of hatred. Hostilities aren't stilled through more hostility. Now you got layers of hostility, right? And it becomes more and more difficult to reduce the layers if one continues to engage in the hostilities. Hostilities are stilled through non-hostility. So, or you might say goodwill. Hostilities are stilled through goodwill. And so that's trying to reduce that feeling of hostility, the feelings of hatred, through practicing goodwill, which is not going around and giving people hugs of people that you may not particularly like or agree with. That's not what goodwill is. Goodwill is just having that authentic intention of saying and doing things where the message is, I just want you to be well. I do not want you to suffer or have these deep feelings of unsatisfactoriness. And that not only assists us in our pursuit of enlightenment, but it gives a little bit of security for that other person. Now, does that mean that the other person or the other people will never take advantage of our goodwill? No, that's not that's it's 100% possible that I could go to someone, uh give them $1 or something and say, I just wish you all the best and that your dukkha is alleviated. And I wouldn't say dukkha, I'd probably say that your suffering is alleviated because they would know what that means. So all the best. And they could still legitimately want to hit me or legitimately, you know, badger me verbally because I only gave them $1 when I could probably give a couple of dollars. Which, in that situation, it's still on me. It's on the person there to say, look, even though this person is badgering me or wants to punch me in the face, if I have those feelings of hostility or those feelings of anger and hatred, the other person has won in that situation because they are taking me down a path of foolishness. And I don't want those layers of hostility, those layers of hatred, those layers of aversion. That only increases the dukkha that is felt. And so it's still on me to be like, okay, this is happening, but not reacting to it, responding to it by taking a second to contemplate it. Or if they're trying to legitimately hurt you, get away. In my opinion, that's not cowardly. That's a saving grace. Tactical retreats are always recommended in those type of situations. If you can do it, awesome. And then regain your state of mind and then press charges if the situation warrants it, because it's not cool and it's illegal. And that's definitely a police matter in that situation. So I'll read the verse again. This is verse 5 of the Dhammapada in chapter 1, which is named the pairs. Hostilities aren't stilled through hostility, regardless. Hostilities are stilled through non-hostility. This, an unending truth. So, so thank you everyone for tuning in to this first edition of Buddhism Monthly. We had our question of the month, we had our picture of the month, and our verse of the month. Do you have suggestions, comments? Think I'm a complete loony and you want to state your dissatisfaction with my loony takes? Please feel free to drop a comment. Also, feel free to subscribe if you wish, or like the video if you like the content. That it's always helpful. So until next time, everyone, take care of yourselves, and we'll chat soon. Goodbye for now.